Hello, viewers. I'm glad you're here. Today, watch me brew delicious Korean rice wine in traditional earthenware jars. Today, I'm brewing in ONGGI. So, ongi means Korean earthenware pottery. And hangari means a jar. I recently bought these 3 ongi hangari, and let's find out what's special about brewing makgeolli in ongi. The first problem we have to solve is we have to scale the recipe to match the jar. Not too full because overflow is a disaster, and not too empty because extra headroom invites contamination. Luckily, there is an easy rule. So here's the rule: how to scale a recipe to match the jar. And this is for a brew with 1-to-1 rice to water ratio. And here's the rule: if the jar is size X in liters, use between X over 4 and X over 3 kilograms of rice. So if you have a jar of a certain size, between 1/4 and 1/3 of that jar should be rice, and then an equal amount of water, and of course the other ingredients in your recipe. So my small jar is 4.8 liters, so that means you should use between 1.2 and 1.6 kilograms of rice. And my large jar has a capacity of 10.5 liters, so that means you use between 2.6 and 3.5 kilograms of rice. So here's my brewing plan for my small jar and my large jar. And I'm going to be brewing both of these at the same time. So let's brew. Okay, starting off on day 0, here's my sweet rice, my chop sal. So I'm going to be using the remaining rice in this bag, which happens to be 4,250 grams. So I'm going to use 1.2 kilograms for A, the small jar, and just over 3 kilograms for B, the large jar. The first thing to do is to wash the rice gently. If you like this video, please click that like button and subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when I publish a new video on the subject of rustic Asian rice wine every week. Please share this video wherever it is appropriate. I really appreciate your help in spreading the word about rustic Asian rice wine. And if you're interested in any of the equipment I use or the ingredients, please look in the description for some more details. After washing the rice for about 10 minutes and no more than 15 minutes, then just leave it to soak for at least 3 hours. And after the 3 hours, drain the soaked rice in a colander. Rinse it out and let it drain for 30 minutes. Now let's clean the ongi. So this is the first time I'm using them, so wash them well, but just wash with water, no soap. And there are some remnants of sand on the bottom, and that might scratch surfaces, so be careful about that. Inside and outside, these feel great. They're very smooth. They're sturdy, but not too heavy. The walls of the jar are relatively thin, and it's supposed to be porous to gases, so the ongi can be said to breathe. I'm going to sanitize the jars with steam. So invert the jar, and I steamed this smaller ongi for 10 minutes until the top got to a temperature of above 70 degrees Celsius. And the larger ongi took 15 minutes for the top to reach that temperature. And to steam the lids, it only took 3 minutes. So now my jars are sanitized, and I've also steamed some cloth. I'm going to need cloth for various things. Yeah, these jars really look great. I'm already having fun using them. So take a look inside. It looks and feels really smooth. There's no irregularities. And here's the larger one. It's also very pleasant to the touch. Okay, that's the ongi, and here's the nuruk I'm using. And I'm using 180 grams for jar A and 450 grams for B, the larger jar. So why am I using more than normal? Well, some advice I received recently is that Danyangju could use some extra nuruk. So this nuruk is going to get some direct sunlight. This is the babche method. Keep it in the sun for a while. We'll steam the rice on medium heat for 40 minutes, then on low heat for 10 more minutes, and then spread out the rice to cool. But I'm going to do something different now that I haven't done before. One of those sanitized cloths steamed, so it's a bit damp, and I'm going to cover the rice as it's cooling with the sanitized cloth. So that should protect it. That's also advice I got. So while we're waiting for the steamed rice to cool, let's soak our nuruk. We'll bring it in from the sun and add some water. For the small ongi, that's the 180 grams of nuruk plus 300 milliliters of water. And for the large ongi, that's 450 grams of nuruk with 600 milliliters of water. And I'm also going to proof the yeast here. So for each jar, 1 teaspoon of yeast, a quarter teaspoon of sugar, and 20 milliliters of warm water. That's between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. And note that the yeast quantity is the same for the small jar as the large jar. So since yeast reproduces itself, it doesn't scale with the recipe. We scaled the amount of rice, water, and nuruk, but the amount of yeast is the same. So we'll just cover these and set them aside. Okay, now the rice has cooled, and I'll divide it proportionally using a scale. So we'll have the right amount for each jar. So starting with the small jar, fill up the rice, add the yeast and the nuruk mixture, and 900 milliliters water, and then mix by hand. So chose the amount of water to make sure I had a 1-to-1 rice to water ratio. Very good. Clean it up a bit, then cover it with a cloth, and the lid is heavy, it'll be kept in place. And now fill up the large jar. So that was originally a bit more than 3 kilograms of rice steamed. Then add the proofed yeast and the soaked nuruk and 2.4 liters of water. Oh, but by mistake, I added 2.6 liters. So I have a bit more water in this one. It shouldn't make too much of a difference, but it's just a little bit more water than rice now. All right, so that's our large jar. Okay, cover it with the cloth and the lid. So using the cloth protects the brew from contamination while allowing gases to escape. I can leave these on the counter to ferment. I don't have to hide them in the cabinet like I do with the glass jars. But still keep them out of direct sunlight, since direct sunlight would affect the temperature too much. So here's the actual amounts of ingredients that I used for these 2 jars. Okay, now the next day, let's take a look, listen to it, smell it, and I'm going to stir this twice a day for 2 days. And I'm using wooden utensils, not metal, because I don't want to chip the pottery. When it's softened up a lot, so that's good. It's definitely fermenting. I can hear it bubbling. You can smell the fermentation too. And I hear more bubbles in the larger ongi. It's just louder. And this is equally soft. But the top still looks, you can still see every grain of rice, but the bottom has softened up a lot. So again, I'm going to mix this morning and evening for 2 days. So the next day, I'm going to stir it again. Let's see if it's changed. So it looks, yeah, there's definitely more liquid now. Yeah, it feels softer, more liquid. give it a good stir, feel the texture. And the same for the large jar. Yeah, look at how much the texture has changed. Just need to stir it for a minute.
Just for a minute.
So one disadvantage of ongi compared with glass is that I can't see what's happening underneath. I'm not stirring anymore, so I'm not feeling the texture. I only need to stir at the beginning, don't need to stir anymore, but I'm not going to be able to detect what's happening underneath. Now it's day 4. Yeah, it still looks the same on top. Really, what is going on? In the large jar, same thing. Looks the same as the day before. Yeah, what can I do? Maybe we'll do this on day 5. So there is something to try to detect fermentation. It's the match test. So let's try that. So let's try it on the large ongi first. Lower a lit match into the jar, and the match goes out. So that means there's enough CO2 being produced by fermentation to extinguish the flame. Now let's try it on the small jar. I lower the match and the match stays lit. So not enough CO2 is produced. So either there's more active fermentation in the large jar than the small jar, or it could be that just the large jar collects the CO2 better. So I'm not sure because I hear both of them bubbling. It's too early to bottle now anyhow. So day 6, I'm going to repeat the match test just to see if that was just aberration. So lowered into the small jar, it stays lit, but the large jar, it goes out. Okay. On day 7, it still looks the same on top visually, but let's try the match test again. Today, neither jar is going to extinguish the match. Okay, so that means, it's filtering time. That's what it means. Today I'm going to use some larger filter bags that I haven't had a chance to use before. So that'll be fun too. And these are nylon filter bags. You can take a look in the description for links. So let's filter the small jar first. It's quite liquid. And I'm going to be able to fit the filter bag over the mouth of the jar and tip the whole thing over. And oh yeah, it looks really good. Nothing is stuck to the bottom. Okay, so that worked well. Ongi worked well. Time to let this drip and squeeze it. For some reason, I'm having trouble squeezing out all the liquid here. It's just taking longer than normal. It seems like I can't squeeze it enough. The amount of leftovers I have, the jigemi for jar A is 435 grams, which is quite a bit, I think a bit more than I was expecting. This is only a 7-day fermentation, so maybe that's what I should expect. But the ongi is not magic. It still ferments similarly to the glass jar. About 2.5 bottles. And I always do this bonus bowl where I re-squeeze the jigemi. I especially want to do that this time because I had trouble squeezing all the liquid out. Yeah, it could be just these filter bags are a bit different than the ones I used before. So for jar A, the jigemi after the second filter went down to 374 grams. Okay, so that's my bonus bowl. I'll drink that today. Now let's filter the large jar. And I'm going to have to use a different technique for the large jar because I don't want to tip it over. So I'm going to have to scoop it out with a ladle, one scoop at a time. And that's really, now I realize that's quite a bit of makgeolli. My bowl is pretty much full. It's going to be a bit strenuous squeezing this. I need to pour out the bottom. Yeah, it's going to be a bit more strenuous squeezing this one. It's a bit more heavy to keep lifted up for this length of time. Squeeze out the liquid. Again, it feels I'm having difficulty squeezing every last drop out, but I have a lot here. I have a lot. This should be I think 6 bottles. Yeah, so it's going to be, there's the 5th bottle. Okay, last bottle is not quite full. Okay, so there's lots of, okay, so I got lots of makgeolli out of this. And then jjigae for jar B, 1,143 grams. Again, that seems like a lot. The jjigae is a bit wet, but I'm going to do the bonus bowl again, adding some water and re-squeezing it. And there's my second bonus bowl. And after the bonus bowl, the jjigae went down to 1,006 grams. So I did extract some more, so that's good. Still a lot of jjigae though. And here's the jjigae summary for those of you that were looking forward to it. All right, here's all the output. Almost 6 bottles from the large jar and almost 2.5 bottles from the small jar. My 2 bonus bowls. Looking good. Yeah, so I'm going to taste those now. And they do taste very similar. I wasn't expecting a big difference in the fermentation, but I'm going to do the real tasting in 6 days. So it's been 6 days, and I want to let you know how this tastes. I also want to summarize my experience brewing in an ongi jar, a hangari earthenware jar. This was a new experience for me, so I want to summarize my experience as well with that, and also with the comparison of the 2 sizes. How is brewing in 2 different size jars different? So, and we'll see if it makes a difference in the brew. I don't think it will, but we'll see. First thing you notice about these bottles is that it has settled really well. I know it's been 6 days, but the amount of sediment is small, and I did have quite a bit of jjigae. I was using new filter bags. That might be why these filter bags seem to hold on to a lot. It was a bit difficult to squeeze, but the result is there's a lot of changju on the top layer here that's relatively clear. I mean, at this point it's still cloudy, but it's relatively clear. And the sediment is on the bottom, but not much. Okay, so we'll give it a taste in a minute. So I want to talk about my experience brewing in an ongi. First thing is these feel really great. They're really smooth outside and inside. They feel great to work with. The tips I had for working with them are not to only use water to wash them. Don't use any soap or detergent. And then sanitize by steaming. And I only used wooden tools to stir. So, I mean, that makes sense. You should, if you're fermenting in one of these jars, you should always ferment the same thing, right? So if I use this jar to ferment kimchi, I should not use it to ferment makgeolli. And another practical thing, at the bottom of the jars, there is some sand stuck to it as a remnant of the firing in the kiln. And that sand, I think, could scratch something, so you do have to be careful where you set these down. But in general, these feel great. And they're not that heavy considering this is a large pottery jar. The walls are relatively thin, and and the porosity is really on a really micro level, because obviously this won't leak. It'll hold water perfectly, and the porosity is a matter of certain gases being able to escape a little more easily or be interchanged little more easily than if this was a glass jar. And the only disadvantage is that this is opaque. It's an advantage in that you can use it. You can just leave the jar on your countertop as long as it's not in the direct sunlight. You don't have to worry about the inside getting any light. So that's convenient. But in terms of making a video, you can't see inside of it, so there's less to see during the brewing process. So that's about the only disadvantage. Yeah, the shape, the feel is really nice to brew in one of these jars. So I want to talk a bit about the scale of brewing here. I brewed in this small jar and in the larger jar I was holding before. There were three obvious differences due to the difference in scale. First was just the amount of bubbling that you could hear. With a larger quantity in the big jar, obviously I heard more bubbling, and it also looked more active, just as a matter of there being more in that jar, and the surface area at the top is smaller in comparison to the volume in the bigger jar. So that means the bubbles would be more concentrated. They would seem more frequent in the big jar. And the other thing is with the match test, it seemed like the carbon dioxide collected more easily in the large jar. And that might also be a matter of the bubbles or just the fact that it's easier to collect the carbon dioxide without dispersing in the large jar. And the third thing I noticed was the temperature of the jars. The fermentation generates some heat, but that heat dissipates more quickly in the small jar. So actually, when I compared the temperature of the outside of the jars, both jars, the large jar was 1 degree Celsius higher in temperature than the small jar. So that's an interesting difference. So that difference in temperature has to affect the fermentation as well. And there's going to be some other aspects, maybe stirring, how much stirring you need to do, and just the fact that there's more, it is more difficult to filter the large jar. That's just, I guess that's obvious. There's just more to deal with, but that is another difference. So those are the differences I noticed in the matter of small jar versus a large jar. But let's get to the tasting. This was from the small jar, and there's some carbonation. I had this a bit loose, so not a lot of carbonation built up. I think I'm going to drink these as wonju. So I can hear a lot of bubbling, but it's not overflowing. And maybe I should have mixed it up a bit more, a little bit chunky here. Okay, so if I shook the bottle a little more, I could get rid of some of these chunks. Smells perfectly normal. A little bit of a sour smell, but also sweet. Smell the alcohol. The texture is good. Even though you can see some chunkiness, that's not in the texture. That's very soft. So the taste, totally what I expected. Brewing in the ongi did not change the taste dramatically. This tastes good. It's my normal single stage brew. So it's a little bit harsh. That's a characteristic. But it has the right, also milky aftertaste, and there is some sweetness at the beginning. Yeah, it's not that tart. It's nicely balanced between sweet and sour, but it is a little bit harsh in terms of the alcohol. Yeah, so it's something you notice. Then it has a milky aftertaste. a little bit astringent at the very end. So in the end, I was able to brew a perfectly normal single stage brew in an ongi jar, an earthenware jar. Now let's taste the larger jar. Now let's taste the brew from the larger jar. Again, I can hear plenty of carbonation, but it's not overflowing. And I shook it a bit more, so there's no chunkiness in this one. Okay, basically the same aroma and taste, but this one is smoother. I don't know why. So a bit less harsh. I think for both of these, it would benefit by adding some water, just by diluting with an equal amount of water. For danyanju, a single stage brew like this, it could be a good idea. It helps reduce that harshness. But this one is less harsh, straight even. Still plenty of alcohol. It doesn't taste weaker, just less of that harsh flavor. Still milky and a bit astringent at the end. So very similar flavor, but just that aspect of harshness is reduced. So I've often been told that brewing a larger jar is better, and it might help keep the temperature more even, and as long as you're able to stir it properly and mix it properly at the beginning, I think it'll turn out a little bit better having a larger jar. Okay, so let's add a bit of water, like I said. Here's A and here's B. Okay, so adding the water makes it more refreshing. There's plenty of flavor in this. So adding the water does not make it taste weak. There's still plenty of flavor, but it is a bit more refreshing. Yeah, and same for this. And because I added sparkling water especially, I think it emphasizes the sweetness. This ends up tasting really good. Both of them taste good, but especially the one that was brewed in the larger ongi. Oh, very nice. Well, so I was so happy to find these ongi at the H Mart, and I'm glad I was able to brew with them and show you what happened today. So as always, let me know in the comments what you think. Have you brewed in an ongi? What kinds of what was your experience like? And tell me what you think of this video. Thank you for watching.